Welcome back to my garage. In this video we continue testing my home-built 50cc supercharged two-stroke engine. I can't do anything during daytime today and tomorrow, which means I can't do any testing until Wednesday. This is Monday. I have to do stuff that's not testing. First thing on the agenda is moving the fuel tank closer to the ground, closer to the engine. The Speedway carb I'm using is not a float carb. It only has one circuit. That circuit is connected directly to the fuel tank via a hose here and a valve. This carb works really well for delivering lots of fuel and it's immune to vibration. Something that might be an issue is that fuel pressure in this hose here is dependent on fuel level in the tank. Now the Speedway guys, they don't seem to have a problem with it. It might not be an issue at all. In the previous video, I think the engine was running rich. At least it felt like it was running rich. Our first step towards leaning down, moving this tank much closer to the carb, much lower. This will also much closer resemble how the engine will be sitting in relation to a fuel tank in a bike. I've been running some simulations of the engine in Emot 2T. I'm not gonna go into detail about how that software works in this video. I made a video a while back talking about all the features. It's basically a software where you can model your engine and then run simulations and see how it behaves. Now I'm running simulations of the pressure traces in the cylinder, exhaust port and transfer ports. You can read a lot about what's going on in your engine from these pressure traces, especially what's going on with the pipe. Here you can see the result from that baseline run. Well, actually this is not that exact run, but it's run with the same parameters. I'm using a combustion efficiency of 0.85 for these runs, which is conservative. It's really low for this kind of an engine. Green line is torque curve, red line is power, black line is power without blower loss. You can see there's quite a bit of loss simulated here. Doing these simulations, I started thinking about something that might be an issue, which I don't think people really think about when it comes to supercharging a two-stroke engine. The big problem people always mention is how the exhaust port is open after the transfers close and all the pressure will just escape out of the pipe. But that pipe is also supercharging the cylinder. So that's not really an issue, at least not in theory. What might be an issue though is a little part of that pipe that makes it work. At the tail end of a two-stroke expansion chamber, there's the stinger, which is basically just a restriction to keep pressure high enough in the pipe. And this restriction, often just a long, thin piece of pipe. In my case, there's this replaceable insert so that I can test out different sizes. This restriction is directly related to engine horsepower. That's what determines the size. If there's more horsepower coming through here, more air, it needs to be bigger to not create too much pressure in the pipe. Too much pressure will cause the exhaust gases to not be able to escape and they will be forced down into the transfers. If you look at my graph here, you can see the engine is actually producing like 43 horsepower. Then the blower takes its piece of the cake and you end up with like 34, 35 horsepower, actual horsepower. The rest is sucked away by the blower. The engine is still producing 43 horsepower and the pipe's stinger will need to be sized for 43 horsepower, not 34 or 35. And herein lies our problem. If we size the stinger to I was gonna say for the pipe to work properly, we would need a stinger for 35 horsepower. But with the blower, we would need a stinger for 43 horsepower and we would have a catch-22 situation on our hands again. Disregard everything I said up until now. With a blower you need to size the stinger to actual engine power before blower loss. That's all. I'm really glad we sat down and had this talk. I was foreseeing a pessimistic future. Now I'm much more optimistic yet again. Let's just pull off that stinger restriction and run without it. Now with the blower, I think that stinger restriction is what's keeping us from really entering the power band of the engine. Continue testing with it completely removed and then add in a less restrictive restriction later on for testing. Yes! ID of this pipe is 22 millimeters. The end of the actual cone is more like maybe 19-20 millimeters. It should be a safe, nice safe starting point now. That Friday, I was attacked by some particularly stubborn and nasty fuckers this time. Managed to fend them off. Took me 2 days though. Was one of the longest 2 days I can remember. All I could think about was testing the engine. I think I'm onto something. We'll find out now. First, let's start it up without power connected to the brake. So it's just free rolling. And then connect the brake and see if there's any power here now. I think it's running lean after we lower the tank. I'll put a larger jet in there. This is the jet I drilled out to 2 millimeters. Before that it had a 210 millimeter jet. I'll see if I can find an even larger one. I drilled one out to 2.5 millimeters just to be on the safe side. I'm hooking up the ignition mate to see if we're still struggling with ignition. I have a feeling we're still running too lean though. I think the problem now is the 0.3 millimeter plug gap is too small. There's not enough spark exposed to the fuel mixture to ignite it properly. I think that's why it's backfiring and bogging down. We need to increase the gap and cross our fingers the ignition unit can cope with it. Not today though, I'm feeling like complete shit again. Apparently those nasty, stubborn bastards haven't been completely fended off yet. I'll be back stronger. Monday, we're back at it. We're gonna continue testing, not only with a larger plug gap, but with a new plug. Same type, a BR10EG NGK. I've ordered some Denso, I think they're called ERL0131 plugs. Should be close to the equivalent of the NGK R7376 plug, which is a great plug. You might have noticed I had to flip a switch on my ignition tester to have it register anything. That's the polarity switch. It was set to negative, but I had to set it to positive for it to register. It means this end of the coil is positive, and thereby the center electrode of the plug is positive. And that means the spark is fired from the ground electrode to the center electrode, which is wrong and could mean more energy needed for a spark to occur. This coil has 3 pins. One is engine ground, one is signal, and one is common. That's ECU ground. I'll use that common pin as signal and then the signal pin as common ECU ground. Luckily the ECU ground and engine ground is not connected internally. People have been saying I need to ground the lugs here, but they're not connected to anything. These are just metal inserts to not crush the plastic housing. From what I've read, it's easier for the spark to jump from the relatively hotter center electrode compared to the relatively cooler ground electrode. This kind of makes sense to me as I'm imagining all those electrons jumping about in that hot electrode and wanting to spring out of it into something else. It's also kind of contradictory as all that jumping about is what makes hotter wires more resistant than the colder wires. Can't find any real information on why it's easier for a spark to jump from a hot electrode versus a cold. I can't give it full throttle. I'm going to test a much smaller main jet and see if that helps. .210 main jet, what came with the carb. I'm gonna try even smaller one. I need to drill one out though. 1.5 millimeter main jet. .210 jet is just as bad as 250 jet, and a 150 jet is maybe a little bit worse. I think it's going lean, but I don't think it's the jet's fault. When I installed this carb on this engine, I did so without installing the surge tank. I thought it wouldn't matter. Could be our problem. Let's reinstall the surge tank and see what happens. And reinstall the 210 jet. Everything back to zero. Could be this hose is too restrictive. Doesn't sound plausible though. It's a big hose. This is the same type of carb that's sitting in the engine. There's a mixture adjustment screw here, and I'm just checking which way is richer and which way is leaner. Then I'll use my newfound knowledge to richen up the other carb. Counterclockwise is raising the needle. Like that. Increased fuel delivery by 1 turn. Let's see what happens. I'm not sure if this is the root of our problem. I think it happened just now. Dislodged a crank seal from the pressure. Might be all the backfires causing this. I'm not running a backfire safety valve, which probably would be a good idea to implement. We'll have to disassemble some and see what happened with that crank seal. That's interesting. There's no fuel nor evidence of fuel sitting here in the cavity in front of the seal. The seal is still intact and in place. And where is this fuel coming from? I can see it puddling here too. Oh. That blower is not happy. It's super tight. Lots of stuff going on. We'll have to pull off the blower and figure out what's going on. At least the crank seals are holding up, so that's a plus. And there's no slack in the crank. It might be the rotors are slightly misaligned. I had this happen one time earlier. Might be sorted by a little tap with a hammer. Or maybe not. I can't see any wear. I'll have to do some investigating, figure out what's going on here. I actually thought this episode was going to be the success episode, where we made more power than anybody else before us. Next time. See you next time.